Hello everybody, my name is Aydın Angoti and today I will present a compelling study that challenges conventional assumptions about IoT security misconfigurations. Conducted at Yokohama National University in collaboration with TU Delft, this research addresses a fundamental question. When exposed IoT devices are identified in enterprise networks, where the responsibility where does actually the responsibility lie? So here's today's roadmap. The researchers used a comprehensive five-part approach to answer who's responsible when IoT devices are exposed in enterprise networks. I'll cover their methodology, findings from owners and manufacturers, the actual security risks, and implications for practice and policy. The common assumption in security is that exposed devices result from owner misconfiguration. Someone made a mistake and did not set things up properly. This study challenges that assumption by asking a deeper question. Is that really true, or are there factors at play? The researchers discovered 185 IoT devices exposing telnet and FTP services in a university network and systematically investigated the root causes of this exposure. So let me first explain what we're dealing with. Telnet and FTP are legacy protocols from 1980s and 70s and 80s. They were designed when the internet was a small trusted network. The problem, you guessed it, they send everything in, including passwords, in plain text. So here's a summary of what they are. Telnet is used for remote terminal access and is a command line service, and FTP is for downloading and uploading files. So the problems, pretty obvious, are there, and today is widely used. Both of these services are used in IoT devices, and modern alternatives, of course, are available. And this research addresses a critical security gap. Telnet and FTP are actively exploited by attackers and rank in the OWASP top 20 IoT vulnerabilities. While consumer IoT security has been extensively studied, enterprise environments remain significantly understudied, on the other hand. This paper fills that gap by examining both the technical and human factors in an academic enterprise network. What sets this study apart from previous research is the comprehensive approach. Most prior work simply scanned networks and assumed user error without investigating the underlying causes. This study employed 5 distinct data collection methods to understand the root cause of the problem. The researchers achieved remarkable response rate of 96% from device owners and 100% from manufacturers, which virtually eliminates the infamous non-response bias. By combining owner surveys, network monitoring, manual analysis, manufacturer interviews, and penetration testing, they could definitively answer why are these devices exposed. They scanned the university network with approximately 65,000 IP addresses. Despite having a firewall, perimeter defense alone is insufficient. Using the Karma service, they ran 15 scans over 13 months for Telnet and FTP, creating comprehensive time series data rather than a single snapshot. They also captured HTTP banners to identify specific device models. These scans actually discovered 220 hosts with exposed services, and 84% of these were IoT devices, 185 in total. These were not consumer gadgets or random equipment. They were enterprise grade devices, including printers, smart card readers, network cameras, and switches. The researchers identified 66 unique device models, with 30 models exposing Telnet and 49 exposing FTP. The key point here is that this is professional equipment used across the university, not hobbyist projects or personal devices. So device ownership was distributed across the university, which is typical of many enterprise environments. Individual faculty labs owned 43 IoT devices, while the IT Service Center itself had 76, mostly smart card readers. Department staff, administration, and attached schools also managed their own devices. This decentralized management model is important because it mirrors real world enterprise networks where not everything is centrally controlled. It is not just one department making mistakes, it's a systemic issue across the organization. So after identifying the exposed devices and their owners, the researchers needed to engage with them directly. This is where the notification strategy comes in. They executed this in two carefully designed ways. In November 2021, 57 device owners received detailed emails including device IPs, risk descriptions, mitigation recommendations, and a survey. The response rate was exceptional, 96%, which is virtually unheard of in security research. 6 months later, they conducted targeted follow ups for devices that remained exposed. A critical success factor was that notifications came from IT Service Center staff rather than external researchers, which establishes immediate credibility and trust. The first survey included 6 key questions, which 2 being absolutely critical to the research. Questions were asked if question like to highlight some of them. Question 3 asked if owners even knew Telnet or FTP was running on their devices, and question 5 asked if they were willing to take measures to fix it. These answers would reveal whether this was truly an owner awareness problem or something else. The researchers used rigorous qualitative methodology. 2 independent coders generated standardized labels like insecure device spec or interfering with work, then resolved any disagreements through consensus. This ensures reliable, unbiased analysis of the open-ended responses. So now we get to the first major finding, and it's striking. Over 90% of owners with Telnet-enabled devices were unaware it was running. Only 2 out of 23 knew it. For FTP, 80% were unaware. Even more revealing, when services were enabled by default, awareness was almost non-existent. Only 1 owner knew about Telnet and 8 about FTP out of dozens of devices we just mentioned. This data strongly suggests the problem isn't owner negligence or carelessness. Owners simply did not know these services existed on their devices to begin with. So once owners were informed about the risks, their response was remarkable. Of the 44 owners willing to remediate Telnet devices, 43 successfully did so. That's a 98% success rate. For FTP, all 71 willing owners achieved 100% remediation. But what about those who were unwilling? A good question. The primary reason wasn't apathy or laziness. It was that the device specifications simply did not allow them to disable the service. This finding shifts responsibility away once more from owners and points directly towards manufacturers' design choices. The remediation methods reveal something unexpected. The most common action was not closing ports or filtering traffic. It was completely stopping use of the device. 20 devices, each for Telnet and FTP, were simply turned off and removed from the network. This raises a very important question. Were these devices unnecessary to begin with, or did owners sacrifice needed functionality for security? Either way, it demonstrates that owners took the risk seriously enough to abandon equipment rather than leave it exposed. Other actions included port closures and communication filtering. Having established that owners were largely unaware of these services, The researchers needed to understand why. This leads to the third research question. Do device manuals actually inform owners about Telnet and FTP? They obtained official user manuals for 60 device models and systematically examined them. Two researchers independently coded each manual, looking for any mention of the services, their default slate, security warnings, and whether they could be disabled. What they discovered in these manuals is shocking. Here's where manufacturer responsibility becomes undeniable. Half of all Telnet enabled device manuals had absolutely zero mention of Telnet, not a single word even. For FTP, 20% had no mention whatsoever. Even worse, when services were mentioned, 93% of Telnet manuals and 84% of FTP manuals provided no security advice at all. Owners were expected to secure services they did not know existed, with no guidance on how to do it. This isn't a documentation oversight, it's a systemic failure by manufacturers to inform their customers. Here's where manufacturer responsibility becomes undeniable. Half of all Telnet devices manuals had zero mention of Telnet. For FTP, 20% had no mention. Even when services were mentioned, between them who actually mentioned these services, 93% of Telnet manuals and 84% of FTP manuals provided no security advice at all. Owners were expected to secure services they didn't know existed with no guidance. A systemic manufacturer failure again. So you might be wondering, did manufacturers address these issues in later firmware updates? Unfortunately, no. The researchers examined firmware update histories for 37 devices, many with recent releases from 2019 and later. Not a single firmware update explicitly mentioned Telnet or FTP existed, like 0%. This means even diligent owners who regularly update their firmware would not resolve the exposed services problem. The issue persists across device life cycles, and manufacturers have not used firmware updates as an opportunity to disable risky default services or even inform users about them. To understand manufacturer intentions directly, the researchers took an innovative approach. The university's chief information security officer conducted 14 manufacturers as a paying customer, not as researchers. This was crucial for getting honest responses. They targeted manufacturers whose manuals had the worst documentation, no mention of services, no stated purposes, or no manual available at all. They asked 4 straightforward questions about services purpose, default settings, credentials, and security measures. Remarkably, they achieved a 100% response rate from all 14 manufacturers. The manufacturer responses are absolutely stunning. For 16 devices, manufacturers said Telnet was for management, but couldn't clarify whether for owners or for themselves. A critical distinction here. 6 manufacturers did not even know why Telnet was on their devices. Most shocking, one manufacturer was completely unaware that Telnet was running at all. 21 out of 22 models were enabled by default, and the same number had zero security measures if compromised. These are not small oversights. They reveal fundamental gaps in manufacturer security awareness and design practices. FTP responses showed slightly better awareness but similar security problems. 7 devices used FTP for remote printing, 3 for data transfer, and 1 for management. At least manufacturers generally understood their own features in this case. So, however, 10 out of 12 models were enabled by default, and 9 out of 12 had no security measures whatsoever. While manufacturers knew what FTP did, they still shipped devices with it, running by default without adequate protection or disclosure. The pattern is consistent. Services enabled out of the box with minimal security considerations. By combining the manual analysis with manufacturer survey responses, the researchers established definitive evidence about default configurations. 73% of Telnet-enabled devices and 59% of FTP-enabled devices were confirmed to run these services by default. This is the crucial point. Owners never made a choice to enable risky services. Manufacturers made that decision for them, shipped devices in that state, and often failed to disclose it. When we find exposed devices on network, it's not because owners misconfigured them, it's because manufacturers pre-configured them insecurely. So to demonstrate the actual security impact, the researchers moved beyond surveys and documentation to hands-on testing. They purchased 2 devices and borrowed 5 others, all models that had zero mention of Telnet or FTP in their manuals. They tested whether attackers could access these devices with default credentials, what commands could be executed, and what privileges were granted. The goal was to show concrete exploitable risks rather than theoretical vulnerabilities. One limitation: purchased devices might have different firmware versions than those deployed on campuses, on the campus, the university campus. FTP testing revealed similar vulnerability across all 5 tested devices. Every single one accepted the same default password used for the web interface. One device followed complete file system access via FTP, while another could list system directories. Even the restricted devices still allowed access to sensitive folders. Beyond Telnet and FTP, the researchers discovered additional web interface vulnerabilities, including XSS, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, CSRF, and improper authentication. They even identified a zero-day vulnerability serious enough to warrant responsible disclosure to the National CERT CERT and ultimately receive a CVE number for it. To understand root cause, the researchers applied James Reason's Swiss cheese model for safety science. This model basically shows that accidents rarely have a single cause. They occur when multiple failures align like holes in Swiss cheese. The traditional view blames human error as the root cause, but that's just the final hole. Here, manufacturers created multiple vulnerabilities, enabling services by default, not documenting them, providing no secure guidance, using default credentials, and ignoring issues in updates. The owner's supposed error is merely the last step in a chain of manufacturer failure. So let's synthesize the 4 major findings. First, owners were overwhelmingly unaware, 91% didn't know about Telnet, 80% about FTP. Second, when informed, owners acted decisively with 98 to 100% remediation success rates among those willing to fix issues. Third, manufacturer documentation was severely inadequate. Half of Telnet manuals and half of them had zero mention of Telnet, and over 80% provided no security advice at all. Further, fourth, manufacturers chose to enable these services by default in the majority of devices. These findings converge on a single conclusion. This is fundamentally a manufacturer problem, not an owner issue. So the evidence clearly answers the responsibility question. Owners cannot be held primarily responsible when services were enabled by default without their knowledge, not disclosed in manuals, and came with no security guidance. Yet, when notified, they responded with 96% survey participation and near perfect remediation rates. Conversely, manufacturers enabled risky services by default, provided inadequate or non-existent documentation, offered no security advice, neglected firmware fixes, and in some cases were not even aware of their own services. The paper argues that labeling these as misconfiguration is essentially victim blaming. Owners did not misconfigure anything. Manufacturer shipped insecure products. These findings have significant implications beyond the single study. For security researchers, it demonstrated the need to investigate manufacturer practices rather than defaulting to user blame. Human error often masks systemic design failures. For policymakers, this provides evidence for requiring mandatory service disclosure, security by default standards, and improved documentation requirements. For practitioners, the study proves that security notifications are highly effective in enterprise environments when they come from trusted sources, and that even minimal on site support can resolve most issues. Internal knowledge, like network scanning, remains essential regardless of perimeter defense in place. And the authors acknowledge important limitations in their studies. This study examined a single university network in Japan with exclusively Japanese manufacturers, limiting generalizability actually. So academic networks may be less centrally managed than some corporation environment, though distributed ownership existed in many enterprises. We cannot determine if Japanese manufacturers are better or worse than those elsewhere. However, these findings align with existing consumer IoT research suggesting manufacturer security failures may be widespread rather than isolated to this specific context. This study makes three significant contributions. Methodologically, it's the first to combine all five data collection approaches: owner surveys, manufacturer survey, manual analysis, penetration testing, and network monitoring, with near perfect response rates that eliminates selection bias. Significantly, and scientifically speaking, it provides clear empirical evidence of manufacturer responsibility and demonstrates owner willingness to act when properly informed. Practically, it achieved real-world impact by securing 98 devices with perfect remediation among willing owners. This isn't purely theoretical research. It actually solved a problem. It studied while providing evidence for policy interventions. This study opens several important questions. Why did 40 devices get completely shut off? Necessity versus security trade-off. How do manufacturer practices differ internationally? Future work could include cross-national comparisons, extended studies tracking improvements over time, and evaluating regulatory interventions. Each direction could deepen our understanding of IoT security responsibility. Based on these findings, here are actionable recommendations for each stakeholder. Device owners should regularly scan their own networks, never assume devices are secure by default, and critically examine manuals for what's not disclosed, not just what is. So manufacturers must disable risky services by default, fully document all running services, provide clear security guidance, allow owners to disable services, and address issues in firmware updates. Regulators should consider requiring several disclosure of service, mandating security by default principles, and enforcing minimum documentation standards. These are not radical suggestions. They are basic security hygiene that should already be standard practice. To directly answer the paper's title question, manufacturers left the door open, of course. They shipped devices with services enabled by default, doors wide open. They failed to document these services. Owners did not know the doors even existed. They provided no instructions on securing them, no guidance on how to close the doors. The solution is not complex or unreasonable. Manufacturers simply need to ship devices secure by default, document what's running, and explain how to secure it. These are basic security principles, not impossible demands. Until manufacturers accept this responsibility, exposed devices will continue appearing on networks across the globe. So And so here I have put some slides about the appendices. They have some interesting data. They go deeper into data. Like for example, here we talked about like they talk. I put the slide about like response rates by affiliation or device types and in detail, in like in very detail. So and also they have like two notification waves, and they have included the templates that you use for connecting device owners. So and for they even did like this survey on new devices, assuming that these devices were old. And this is the details of the penetration testing that they conducted. Also, this is the quick summary of the appendices that they had. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this presentation. Since you're watching this recording, feel free to drop any questions on the discussion board. So I put the link right here on the slide, as you can see. I'll be checking that thread regularly and answering questions there, so everyone can see the discussion. If you'd rather chat one-on-one, you can always shoot me an email at my email, angoti3@gatech.edu. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and diving deeper into any part of this research that interests you. Thank you again for watching.